views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, as an employee with a physical or mental disability, your ability to earn a living is limited. But did you know there are many beneficial programs available that help ease your way while at work? We have an expert on set to walk us through a specific area of law known as disability law. Next up, with the immigration raids that began this weekend in many U.S. cities, including New York City, illegal aliens have been living with the fear of deportation. But being an immigrant does not mean you don't have rights. You do, and our immigration attorney will make sure you know how to protect yourself and your family. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. Hello, welcome to Today's Verdict, a live and interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at Today's Verdict and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, make sure to like us and follow us on Facebook at Today's Verdict and check us out at bronxnet.tv. Professionals with a physical or mental disability, or even those who are injured while on the job, have benefits which can help them financially. Here to tell us more about special programs you can apply for is attorney Joseph Romano. Joseph, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for allowing me.
You know, we were talking a little about, before we even got on the set, about how workers' compensation has really changed. And things I didn't necessarily know about in terms of just forms. There's so much to know about. Have you found that it's becoming harder and harder to really apply for workers' compensation benefits?
Yes, when I started 33 years ago, it was a very simple process. One-page form and filed, and basically the board would take the claimant through the process. Eventually you would get to an attorney, but the board would be the person or the entity that would take you through the process.
It almost seems like it's very adversarial now.
Yes.
Board versus, victim or person who was injured. And is that a feeling that just too many people are trying to get into the system itself? Is there limited amounts of money? Why the pushback?
Well, it's more philosophical now. In other words, people are against, and when I mean certain groups of people are against government programs. So it started with welfare or workfare kind of thing where you had to get welfare benefits. Now they say, oh, if you're going to get welfare benefits, you got to work. And then they realized that that didn't work. And they took that concept and they said, anyone, personal injury lawsuits, workers' comp, welfare benefits, benefit programs are something that certain groups of people are against. So workers' comp was thrown into that. And so what they decided to do is create barriers over the years to make it more difficult to get those benefits.
Which just shows how important it is at the very beginning to get it right. To not give the board any real reason to immediately want to deny you. So let's walk the viewers through a typical workers' compensation case. Obviously, somebody is injured while on the job, right?
Yes.
What should they do, or what usually happens once you have an injury right at the pizza place or wherever you are, furniture store, you get injured? What should you do as the injured employee?
The first requirement is called notice. You have to tell your supervisor that you've been injured. Even if it's just verbally telling them, generally you want to have it in writing, but if you just do it verbally, that's good enough. And then the employer is under the obligation to then continue the process from there. File what's called a C2 form, and then notify their compensation carrier.
And by the way, we're talking about workers' compensation insurance. There are employers who do not have insurance, unfortunately, but that's not the law. You need to have insurance, correct?
Correct. The uninsured, if you're an uninsured employer, there is a fund called the Uninsured Employers Fund in the state of New York, which is very different than other states. So there is a fund that covers that, even when you don't have insurance.
Okay, so now someone's been injured, unfortunately, and hopefully these particular forms have been filed, or at least you gave your employer notice, which is you're supposed to do, and they get to you, right? What happens next? What do you do?
What I do is I walk through with the claimant and the client, and I say, this is what the process is. We have to file a C3 form. I've had them file also a notice of retainer, says I'm representing, I'll be notified if anything happens on the case. I also talk to them about HIPAA releases and being able to speak to their doctors. I also talk to them about getting what's called a 110A form, which is about prior injuries in the workers' comp system.
And why is that important?
It's very important because the law has changed, especially in the last 10, 15 years, where the carriers and actually the judges at the board level will attack the claimant and say, you didn't tell me about this prior accident. You didn't tell me about this prior back condition. You didn't tell me about this motor vehicle accident. And then this law, which changed, let's say, about 20 years ago, it's called 114A. It's called insurance fraud. If you don't reveal these things, the board, the judge, will say you committed fraud and then deny your claim.
So is the burden on you as the person, as the injured party, to give all this information, or can you give the authorizations to whomever so they can get the medical records from the hospitals to see if you ever had a previous injury, or is it on you? You have to say, hey, I got injured 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I may have gotten injured 50. What if you forgot? And what if you don't remember?
Well, that's the problem. So what happens is the law has now put the onus on the claimant to disclose all their previous medical conditions. So if you don't do that, you have a real big problem in a case where you have an aggressive judge that's against the claimant. And the form has changed. The C3 was about 8 questions, 7 or 8 questions. Now it's got to be 20. And one of the forms, and it so happens to be right at the end of this now a double-page a 2-page long, extensive claim form.
Have you been previously injured?
Correct. And you have been treated and who the doctors are. And if you just leave that blank, that still doesn't cover you. Everyone would say, just leave it blank, don't worry about it. No, if you don't affirmatively answer that question and in a correct manner, you have a problem. So what I do is I ask the claimant and I say, did you have prior cases? Do you have a motor vehicle? Did you have workers' comp? Did you get hurt? Whatever. And I'd say maybe, possible. So I have these disclosures there so that if anyone ever questions later on, I say, I did have a problem. I kind of just remembered it. As long as you give some inclination as there may have been some prior history, that could save you.
When the board denies you, and obviously you're getting notice of it, what do you do? Do you file an appeal immediately? Is there any kind of negotiation that works out? How does that really work?
There is supposed to be all this communication between yourself, your attorney, and the carrier. There is no communication. They're not there to resolve cases. They're not going to talk to you. Basically what they do is they let the judge at the board level take care of the problem. They're not going to negotiate. They just don't. So what happens is you have to then prove your case. Now, you are a personal injury attorney. You know how difficult it is to do your job. Now, for me, as a comp attorney, it was very easy. I would just go in and say, hey, claimant testify. That's not good enough. I have to do what you do. I have to get witness statements. I have to get witnesses to come in and testify. I have to subpoena records. And that is a whole different animal as opposed to just an administrative hearing.
And I used to, whenever I pick a jury, or I'm at the point where I say, look, when you're really, deliberating and trying to come up with a number for, an injury, this isn't like a workers' compensation case. You pull down, you match, body part to amount of, it's not so easy anymore. I mean, I made it seem that way, but it's not. The workers' compensation field has gotten complicated. I hear from a lot of attorneys, and it's not necessarily fair. Can we shift gears for a second?
Yes, sure.
I want to talk about a little bit Social Security disability.
Yes.
Do you mind?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
because a lot of the viewers have been telling me that they have not been able to get their Social Security disability, even though they've applied for it. What do you?
Okay,
Talk a little bit about this.
In the Bronx.
Right.
It's probably besides, and there's an area in New Jersey, the Newark area, is the most unrepresented claimant basically in the country. It's one of those big areas. And if the attorney was involved early in the process, the claimant would be successful. But it's a very complex system. so that if you don't know how to get to that point of being able to get a favorable decision, you're going to be denied, because generally there are so many different levels in the comp system, in the Social Security.
Is it more complicated than the workers' comp system?
Yes, it is.
Because most people go into the SSD, the Social Security Disability System, on their own. They don't really go through an attorney.
They don't, but now what they're doing is they're making you prove your case. That it's a little bit more difficult in the sense that you have to make sure you get all your records. You have to have these particular forms that have to be filled out by the doctors. If they're not filled out properly, they generally can just deny it based on that.
Because it always seems, and it takes us back to what we were talking about when we first started, that there seems to be an onus on the victim to have to show that there is this injury that's related. There's no previous injury, that you have the disability. It's almost like we're looking at ways not to give somebody the compensation that they really have either paid into the system for, taxes for many, many years, or they just, listen, we have Social Security for a reason, to help those who can't help themselves. But it always seems like it's not really helping them.
Well, what they do is they create barriers. The system creates more barriers to deny the claims. The other thing is, remember, we have a particular group of people that view these systems as not necessary. So when you have a group that's fighting the system itself, saying, create more barriers so that these claimants don't get the benefits. That's the thing that most people don't understand, that there's a whole philosophical approach to this where they're trying to deny claims.
Okay, some tips. Somebody's watching right now, either workers' comp, Social Security disability, Social Security income, whatever it is. What would you tell them? Obviously, we're going to get to you. We're going to get your contact information. Well, what immediately should they be doing? Really?
The first thing they should do is always tell the employer and have some type of proof. A lot of my clients now text their employer, and then they take a picture of it, saying we knew about the accident. They also take photographs of what happened. Photographs, in other words, you have this phone here, and this thing.
You can use it all the time.
This thing is an incredible little thing.
Look at the videos that are all over the internet, showing you the police brutality, whatever it is. You have the ability to record whatever you need.
Preserve evidence.
Right. Okay.
Especially because what happens later on is when you come into court and you have certain witnesses don't show up, you have that proof.
Most importantly, where do we find you?
Oh, call my number, 855-965-1515.
There we go. And you're going to come back on, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
See, I told you have a good time. All right, we have to take a quick break, but don't worry. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund reading.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
Welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at today's verdict. With the commencement of raids by federal immigration officials in an effort to find and deport any illegal immigrants, non-citizens have been living with the fear of being separated by their families. Even non-citizens have rights, as returning attorney Kerry Bretz is here to tell us. Hi, Kerry. Thanks for coming back.
My pleasure.
Well, this is a hot topic.
Yep.
And as we were just talking about offset, there's so much information on this, you know, trying to protect the people that another group is trying to get deported, It's just, it's amazing, because I went through this today. You can find that a lot, but it's better if it comes from you.
Sure, why not?
All right, let's start from the point somebody is on the street, let's say, right? And they get looked at the wrong way, and it's an ICE official, and the ICE official says, are you a citizen, yes or no? Do you have to answer that?
Right, so you don't have to answer that.
You do not.
But it would be rare in New York to get that stop on the street.
Fair enough. Now, let's say you are asked that question, all right? And you could be maybe stopped because there's some kind of potential crime going on, which I think that's really the fear is. You've either, jumped a turnstile or you're going through the back of a bus, and now all of a sudden you're fair game. Can they ask you at that point?
Right. So you're fair game when you are near a border. Okay. And the rules have changed. When I started back in 1991, it was 3 miles from the border. Now it's 200 miles from the border. And so anybody can be questioned, and often ICE and Customs and Border Protection hop on buses in the Buffalo area and where they can do that. In New York City, that's almost never going to happen. One, because the state's highest court has ruled that New York State law enforcement cannot enforce ICE laws. They can't hold somebody for ICE, so it's not going to happen in New York City.
So let's just say there is somebody who's been working illegally in this city. And that particular individual, I don't know, is just randomly in a supermarket or someplace else, and here come the ICE officials who would just happen to be shopping, and they bump into each other, and there's some words, and the ICE official turns and says, are you a citizen, by the way?
Yeah, so there's no obligation.
You don't have to answer that.
Correct. There's no obligation to answer that question. And this typically comes up with a knock on the door. They've done an investigation, and there's a knock on the door, usually at 6:30 or 7 a.m. before you wake up. And there's, 3 guys, they say police, and then the question is what happens, right? And people get very, very nervous.
Right.
So you have the absolute right not to speak. You don't have to answer any questions. You don't have to give your name. You don't have to say anything. What you can't do is lie. It would be a crime to lie
It's
to
funny
law
because
enforcement.
but I read that. That's the most important thing. It seems to say always tell the truth, no matter what. You may not want to talk, but if you're going to say something, don't lie.
Correct. So if they say, Mr. Bretz, is your wife Eileen at home? And you say, no, she's not. She hasn't been here for 3 weeks.
And
when
out
she
she
is,
walks. You got a problem.
You've essentially committed a crime. But I have no obligation to even say I'm Mr. Bretz. And the easiest thing to do is say, I wish not to speak with you. Leave your business card, and I'll ask my lawyer to call you.
And
Have a
can
nice
you
day.
say that?
Yes, you can.
You can say that. All right, so now let's get the lawyer involved. All right, here you go. You show up. Where do you usually get involved? Are you brought into the precinct sometimes? Do you go to meet somebody in the house? If detectives want to talk to the person, where do you kind of come into this?
I come in various ways. People who are proactive about their cases know that they were stopped by Customs and Border Protection when they crossed the border, paid a bond, got out, maybe forgot to go back to court, maybe didn't get notice. They're proactive, they come in. I might investigate that, determine that there's an in absentia deportation order. There's a lot of these in absentia orders that are done without people being there because the notice rules are very vague. So somebody like that, we would be proactive in trying to get the case reopened. But somebody who's arrested and detained, who didn't do that, ICE came to their house, they opened up the door, they let them in, then it's usually a family member or them calling us collect from an ICE detention center, hey, I need help.
Which is so important. In other words, they call you collect, but from what I'm reading, you need to memorize phone numbers of family members. I mean, how does that?
Those collect calls are outrageously expensive. It's such a scam. Each ICE rents space in the New York district from various county jails, actually mostly in New Jersey. The New York district rents space in New Jersey. And each one of those jails have their own contracts with individual telephone companies, and those calls are really
Very expensive. I'm sure you must get a
Yes.
ton of those calls.
Yes.
All right, so let's say you're detained, okay? And this is what everyone's fearful of in this city. What are the odds that they're putting you on a plane and sending you back someplace?
So if there was already a removal or deportation order, either done in absentia, you didn't know about it, you knew about it, you didn't go to court, or you actually went through court and you wound up having an order and just nobody executed that order, you're in a tough spot because ICE could essentially put you on a plane. They typically have to get a travel document. They can't just put people on a plane and drop them off.
I mean, do they do that? I mean, I never hear about planes going back and forth out of JFK to drop people off to their
They
home
no longer
countries.
use commercial flights.
they
They contract, we call it ICE Air. They have contract planes that go almost entirely out of Louisiana and Texas.
Really?
So if if there's a lot of people going to Central America or the Caribbean, they might make a stop in Santo Domingo and then make a stop in Jamaica. They might make 2 stops in Central America on
Pick
their
up
way to
people and they
Ecuador
just-
or
and they just
Colombia.
keep going.
Yeah, and so these flights are going out on a regular basis. So, but they have to get a travel document, which means it's usually, people think it's a good idea to carry their foreign passport with them. It's usually not a good idea to do that because that's, first of all, prima facie proof that you're not a
Right.
citizen of the United States. And secondly, if it's valid and there's a removal order,
They can put you right on the plane.
They can put you right on a plane, and then there's no time for a lawyer to get involved and
From
do
what
something.
I'm told, and I don't know this firsthand, that apparently many ICE agents are in the courthouses in the city of New York, certainly the criminal courts, and where it looks like a judge is either you've copped to a plea and you're pleading to something, ACD or whatever it is, they wait for you out in the hallway, they've done their research and they pick you up. Is that true,
Right, so
false,
this is
or not?
Yeah, this is a really hot topic, and ICE has been doing that. And the New York state courts are amazing. They've been fighting back. So it used to be that they would lodge these detainers. Please hold this person until we get there. And court officers and corrections officers and even local police would do that.
Yeah.
It's now against the law. You can no longer
Really?
do that in New York State. That doesn't mean ICE can't try to identify you outside the court.
Because I remember reading there was a particular judge who got in trouble. They let somebody out the side door. She let somebody out the side door, and right when the officers were in the ICE officers were in the courtroom, and she basically let the detainee leave, so he couldn't be arrested. And I don't know whatever happened with it, but I mean, whatever side you're on the debate, whether you feel it's appropriate to be, to be trying to grab the population that's here illegal or not. Certainly, you got to follow whatever the law is and whatever the rules are. I just don't necessarily know what the rules are.
Well, but David, let's say you're a criminal defendant, you're a citizen, and there's another open case for you. Detectives don't come into a criminal court and arrest you. They wait outside. So there's no judge that's going to be happy about law enforcement, FBI, New York City, whatever, walking into their court to effect an arrest when they're conducting some other judicial business.
Let's talk about some of the fear, because there seems to be fear all over the city. That have you heard either through your clients or anyone else that there has been an uptick in the rounding up of illegal aliens?
Right. So there really hasn't been in New York, as far as we know. We get some, some information
Word on the
here
street,
and there, right?
that kind of thing.
We heard over last weekend and the weekend before, we heard of some people up in Haverstraw and Rockland. There might have been an operation in Park Slope, but there's always been operations. ICE has been doing this for the last, 15 years, trying to determine who's deportable and going out to certain areas to pick up as many people as they can from that area so they don't come back empty-handed. But the rhetoric and the idea that we're doing these raids has instilled a tremendous amount of fear, where I have businesses calling me saying, hey, my employees are not coming to work on Sunday. Can you advise them what their rights are? And what's made this really different is that the focus now is families. It's families, it's asylees, it's not necessarily those with a criminal history or a fraudulent history. I haven't heard of anybody in gangs being picked up recently. It's families. And this is a change in I'm doing this 27 years, including having been a prosecutor for the old INS. This is a big change in philosophy.
Changed.
Yeah.
Tips. Someone's watching right now. They think that their person's being stalked and possibly going to be detained. What do they do? Run away? How do you?
Well, I would never recommend that somebody run away, make a furtive movement, but you have no obligation to open that door. ICE will almost never have a judicially enforced warrant with them. And they will use tricks. They will knock on the door and say, hey, your car was just broken into and, we need you to sign some papers. They use all kinds of things, but you have no obligation to speak. Speaking often will get you into trouble, and you have no obligation to open that door. And if you think you're in that circumstance, you might as well get professional counseling about what your rights are.
Let's give some information. Where do we find you?
Sure. So it's Kerry Bretz, Bretz and Coven. We've been around for about 25 years. We have offices now in the Bronx, which I'm happy to say, at 2555 Grand Concourse. And we're downtown in Manhattan in New Jersey. And our telephone number happens to be very close to our address.
Before I let you go, my last question to you is, where do you think we're heading here? You could either do it politically, you could do it as an attorney. Where are we going in terms of the immigration debate, in your opinion?
Well, unless there's a change in leadership all around in the Senate and the executive, I don't think we're going to see much in the way of legislation. But comprehensive immigration reform is way, way overdue, and they've been discussing it since before,
Well, this
September
is a hot topic,
11th.
and we love you coming on. You're going to come back, right?
Sure.
All right. It's nice having you again, at least. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at bronxnet.tv. Always remember, if there is a legal issue or topic you would like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org or tweet us at Today's Verdict, and make sure to ask and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict. From myself and all of us at the show, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. See you next time.
When I was in high school, I was physically at school, but my mind wasn't at school. I had problems at home, and that's hard when you feel like you're doing it alone. That's when I met an artist, my mom, as I'll call her. She started helping me a little bit, like, Nia, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but your future is more important. She's my strength. Just being a support for those hard days and those hard nights, not giving up on me. Thank you to my mama. I wouldn't have did this if it wasn't for her. Today is for my mama and everybody who had my back. It takes a village to help somebody get their diploma. Some people would think, well, maybe it's really not that big of a deal, but it really is. It changes your whole life.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices?
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies. Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's split a ride home.